I'm a teenager who lives in a small town in the Midwest. I will not disclose my location because what I experienced at an abandoned ice cream factory should never be experienced by anyone else. I am telling the story much to my friend Rachel's chagrin. I want to apologize to her in advance for what I'm about to disclose to you. Semester had just started a few weeks ago, so by the beginning of the fall season I was already bored out of my mind because school has always been easy for me, and not challenging at all. My history teacher, Mr. Bell, gave us a project that had to do with the history of our town. He had already assigned me a partner, Rachel. She was fairly new to town and didn't know much about it, and Mr. Bell thought I would be a good partner to show her what our town had to offer. Our town was established in the late 1800s but had a big boom in the 1920s. That was the time that we started getting more traction with things like sit-down restaurants, an amusement park, and an ice cream factory. The latter closed during the 90s due to budget cuts. It was a fly-by-night closure. Corporate told management and the workers to drop what they were doing and to leave the factory immediately. Still to this day, we believe that it goes way deeper than budget cuts. Our town believes something worse happened inside the factory. Rachel was instantly intrigued by the story. We knew we had a topic. We went on the internet to find out more details. We also visited the public library to read articles that can only be accessed through our local paper. The deeper we dug, we only came up with more questions that needed to be answered. I jokingly told Rachel that we should break into the building and see what we could find. She took the idea and ran with it. I told her I was joking, but I was also anxious and excited about the idea, so I quickly came around. We agreed to enter the building that Friday night. That Friday finally came. We agreed Rachel would come over to my house for a sleepover. We would act like we were sleeping and leave the house around 10 o'clock that evening. We would sneak out and walk to the factory because it was only a couple of miles from my house. We both thought the plan was genius. It happened like clockwork as we grabbed our backpacks that we had the necessary tools. We each had a flashlight, some rope, and of course, our phones to take pictures if needed. We eventually discovered that we did need pictures. As we approached the east side of the building, we noticed there was a small opening where a glass window used to be. We carefully slinked our way through the window and entered a pitch-black factory. Flashlights were instantly needed. The first thing that we noticed was the front desk where employees would have to sign in before they could enter the factory. Besides some dust, it was preserved in time. Rachel started taking pictures with her iPhone. The last person to sign in was named Walter Wilson on July 17, 1992. It was crazy to think that neither one of us was even born in 1992. It was time to proceed. We shined our flashlights to a sign on both sides of the walls. The women's locker room was to the left and the men's to the right. We both decided to split up and explore. I took the men's room and Rachel took the women's. In the men's room, I saw a bunch of lockers that still had locks on them and a few items that were like a time capsule, such as a 1992 Dallas Cowboys Super Bowl championship pennant above a locker, a CD of the Kiss album, Revenge, and a bunch of scattered paperwork of the respected year. It was fascinating as I took pictures of everything. I heard Rachel scream, so I ran to the women's room across the hall. I walked in a panic as she told me she found a bunch of rats, chewing on the corpse of a dead cat. I guess the poor thing had wandered in, not knowing it was going to be its grave. She instantly melted into my arms for comfort. We played it off and agreed to continue after we took a few pictures. We walked down the hall and opened up to the heart of the factory. There were metal steps that led to a higher floor, a bunch of metallic drums that the ice cream was mixed in, and machinery that made everything work. I told her we needed to split up again and that I would take the second story if she took the first. She said she didn't want to split up because she was still traumatized by the rats eating the cat. So we stuck together. We did a sweep of the first floor and took pictures of the machinery, which included the operator pad, inside of the mixers, which included some very fragrant spoiled ice cream and abandoned hairnets as well as boots and gloves. They had to drop everything when they left. It wasn't until we got to the story that we found very interesting things. As we were climbing the steps, one of them broke and Rachel started to fall. I grabbed her wrist just in time. However, she did slice up her leg on the rusted metal. We hurried into the management office to find a first aid kit. The door was unlocked, so we walked in. On the wall, we did find a first aid kit. We found some hydrogen peroxide, neosporin, and dressing to cover up the wound. Rachel screamed in pain as I applied hydrogen peroxide to her leg. Her scream echoed through the empty factory, which made it even more eerie. I felt so bad, but it was necessary. All of her enthusiasm was drained by the traumatic experiences from the factory. She wanted me to take some pictures of the office and head home. She was upset because she didn't know how she was going to explain the cut on her leg. I told her we would figure it out. As I started taking pictures of the office, I noticed a manila folder with a mountain of dust on top sitting at the corner of the desk. It was labeled classified on the front with a big red stamp. At the moment, I just grabbed the folder and put it in my backpack. I grabbed Rachel and we left the factory and went back to my house. That next Monday, we spent the class working on our project. We went through the pictures and picked which ones we wanted to use for our diorama. It was hard to choose because Rachel did such a great job taking them. We got it lowered down to 6. She had asked me if I looked at that folder marked classified. I told her I was too scared to look at it. She offered to come over and we could look at it together. After school, we walked to my house and told my mom we were working on the project as we went upstairs. I unzipped my backpack and pulled out the folder. You would have thought that I was holding a bomb that was ready to blow. I unclasped the top and pulled out the papers. What I began to read was shocking. The documents explained what happened inside the factory. Everyone's hunch was right. It wasn't because of the budget cut. It was because of a disgruntled employee who was pouring their blood into the mixture of the ice cream. Attached was a doctor's report that Walter Wilson had HIV. The police report attached said he did it because he knew he was about to be terminated and wanted to seek revenge on the factory. Another report was from the World Health Organization stating that operations needed to be ceased immediately. The factory was supposed to reopen 6 months later, but the doors were permanently closed due to the loss of too much money. Rachel couldn't help but throw up after reading the documents. Since the documents hadn't been updated since 1992, I went online to research Walter Wilson. All we found was an obituary. He died 3 weeks later on August 7th. His death was complications due to his HIV. The picture in his obituary was burned into my mind forever. Just knowing what he did was haunting. In the obituary, it said that he had a mother as his only surviving relative. We looked her up in the white pages and she was still in town. We decided to visit her to talk to her about her son. That next Saturday we went to her address. She was home but wouldn't answer the door. I told her that I found the classified documents. She slowly opened the door and told us we had 10 minutes to convince her. We sat down in her living room, and the place was worse for wear. She had not been taking care of herself or the house for the last 30 years. She read through each individual page, and the further she got, the more tears flowed. She threw the papers down on the coffee table, put her face in her hands, and just sobbed. She asked where we got the documents, and we told her at the factory. After a few minutes of crying, she was ready to tell us a story about Walter. He was a hotshot right out of high school after being the valedictorian of his class. He went on to attend Kansas State University to become a politician. While he was at college, he found out that he was gay. He didn't want the ridicule of being outed. So he immediately dropped out of college and came back home to work at the factory. He began sleeping around with the manager, who was a married man. The manager was known for going behind his wife's back and sleeping with other men. She also said the manager is the one that gave Walter the HIV. When Walter confronted him about it, the manager denied it, but Walter was able to pull some strings to get corporate to look into it. After the manager refused a blood test, Walter was given no choice but to leave. He was going to wait until he had enough saved up for his expenses. However, the manager had his termination fast-tracked and claimed that Walter came to work late every single day. To avoid a bigger headache, corporate just decided to let him go after a few days. So quietly, day by day, Walter would cut himself with a box cutter multiple times and started leaking his blood into the mix for 3 days straight. He was then caught by the manager and immediately kicked out of the factory. It was reported to corporate and everything was shut down immediately. Walter then died 3 weeks later in his hospital bed. She didn't condone what he did, but she understood the vengeance that he was dishing out, and that she would have done the same thing if she were in his shoes. I asked her what the manager was up to these days. She said that he died a couple of months later, but due to his actions, his wife left him. He died alone in a rundown motel room, also due to complications of his HIV. She had told the press multiple times that her son was not the bad guy in his situation. He was in fact the victim of a cowardly abuser. Nobody believed her, and she went into a downward spiral soon after her son's death. We both placed our hands on top of hers and told her that we believed her. We had mentioned previously about the project. We asked her if she was comfortable with us recording her video testimony. She said that she would do it for Walter. Our presentation was at the end of the week. We had a diorama that went from the beginning of the factory to its closure. We also wrote a 6-page paper about the incident with Walter and the manager. We finished the presentation with the video she had made. We received our grade at the end of the class and our teacher gave us a D. He said we were to give a history lesson about the factory, not a fictional drama. He told us that though it was creative, it was inappropriate. He didn't believe a single word about the incident. When we tried to contest it with the folder, he told me that we made the whole thing up and that we should be ashamed for roping in a senile old woman into our project. Rachel was mortified that we were the laughingstock of the whole school. She was so frustrated that we had worked so hard to uncover a cover-up for the town. She had me promise that we would never talk about it ever again. I agreed, but since the passing of Walter's mother last week, I couldn't help but resurrect this topic. I'm telling it to you because I trust you. If you would like me to send you the documents, I won't hesitate. This story should not be swept under the rug and it should be believed. I thank you for listening to this story.
A few friends and I decided to get together and explore an abandoned shopping mall. My buddy Ryan's dad is the chief of police and told us it was all right, just don't do anything stupid. Little does he know, everything we do is stupid. Especially when it comes to exploring abandoned places, I've always had a fascination for it, and this one was definitely my magnum opus. The Westwood Mall had closed during the economic crisis of 2008. Not many people were going out and about to buy things that they didn't necessarily need. A few stores closed in the beginning, but as time went on, everything started locking up. The last to go was the movie theater. It had 8 individual screens and actually the best price concession stand items I've ever seen. I mourn the death of the mall because I had countless Saturday afternoons with my dad just being mall rats. Once in a while, we would go catch a movie. The first movie I remember was Batman Begins. On my way to work, I would always pass the mall and just stare at the rotting corpse that used to be so lively. I always get a little nostalgic and can't help but smile. It wasn't until last week when I was talking to my group of friends, Ryan, Jennifer, Aaron, and Jackson. We all agreed that the mall held a special place in our hearts, and we wanted to go down memory lane and potentially find something new to revel in. Ryan's dad was the final nail in that coffin. The anticipation began to build. We all slept over at Ryan's house the night before. We came up with a plan that would help us explore the mall the best way possible. We decided to divide it up into sections to explore. Jennifer wanted to explore the old clothing stores, Ryan, the electronic stores. Jackson, the toy stores, Aaron, the movie theater, and I was going to take the food court that was connected to the arcade. If we decided to do this again with a successful endeavor, we were going to swap sections to get the full exploration. The night of the sleepover, I had a hard time getting to sleep because I was so excited. Even though my dad passed away 2 years ago, I knew that he would be with me for the journey. He loved going to the arcade to school me in Galaga and Miss Pac-Man. We even discussed buying a cabinet with both games available inside of it before he passed. The morning came slowly, but also very quickly at the same time. We all ate breakfast that Ryan's mom prepared for us, and we set out for an all-day exploration. There was news reports about an escaped mountain lion from the zoo, the annual pancake festival, a man that won the lottery, and how we were going to have a record high temperature next week on the TV in the background. We finished eating and geared up to leave. I felt it was only appropriate for it to be on a Saturday. We all carpooled to the abandoned parking lot. It had overgrown weeds and piles of trash that people decided to dump inside of it. Due to my rose-tinted glasses, all I could see was a palace. Ryan's dad told us once again to not be stupid and that he would take care of the silent alarm. Lastly, he was going to come pick us up around nightfall. He drove off and left us to our adventure. There was an old employee entrance that had a faulty lock on it to where it didn't properly lock. We figured that out from Ryan's cousin. We entered through the mall without any problems. The employee entrance was closest to the clothing stores, so Jennifer left us fairly quickly. As we were looking around at the rundown structures, empty fountains, and boarded-up stores, it was so surreal. All I could remember was a lively epicenter for my happiness. The electronic stores weren't too far away, so Ryan left rather quickly as well. They all departed one by one until I was left all alone. I walked up to the entrance of the arcade, and much to my surprise, the gate was open. So naturally, I just walked right in. I stood in the middle of the arcade and just reminisced for a moment. I looked over at the concession stand where they had some of my childhood treats like popcorn or corn dogs. The prize cabinet where I won many plastic treasures, and of course the arcade games. I walked up to the machine that had Galaga and Miss Pac-Man. I probably put enough quarters in that thing to finance a Toyota. Unfortunately, due to no power, I wasn't able to play it for old time's sake. I did, however, walk up to the prize cabinet and grab one of the few remaining Batman rings. I put it in my jean pocket. As soon as I did that, I could hear a scream echo through the abandoned mall. I stepped out of the arcade to investigate the noise. I heard the scream again and immediately identified it as Jennifer. I ran as fast as I could to her end of the mall. When I got there, she was lying on the floor and in a puddle of her own blood. She was shaking and hyperventilating. I asked her what happened, and all she could say was, "I don't know, something with sharp claws attacked me from behind." She didn't get a good look at it before it ran away. She also claimed that she was so much in shock that it was almost silent. I immediately called Ryan so that he could call his dad. Of course Ryan didn't answer, so I dialed 911. Dispatch asked for the information, and I told them the only things I knew. They said they could have somebody come out in 30 minutes. I was terrified when they told me that. I began calling my other friends to get them to meet me at the department store. I was able to get a hold of Aaron, but Jackson and Ryan were not answering their phones. I began to worry that whatever attacked Jennifer could be going after them next. Aaron arrived, and I told him to stay with Jennifer, and I was going to go look for the other two. I ran to Jackson's location first because it was the closest. I began shouting his name, and I received nothing but my own echoes in response. I did a quick sweep of the stores, and I eventually found him, but Jackson was dead. Like Jennifer, he had scratches all over his body and lying in a pool of his own blood. He got it much worse than she did. My blood ran cold as I was on the floor next to my friend's body. I tried calling Ryan again, and he finally answered. He sounded really annoyed that I was blowing up his phone. I told him what was going on, and that Jennifer was wounded and Jackson was dead. He thought I was pranking him, but I assured him I was not joking. Right as he told me that he was on his way, I heard a growl and a scream on the other end before the sound of a phone hitting the ground. I ran out of the store and saw on the second story Ryan running for his life. Giving chase was a mountain lion. The same mountain lion that had escaped from the zoo last night. How he got in, I will never know. I've never seen Ryan look so scared in his life. I had to come up with some plan to prevent him from being the next victim. I yelled to him that I had a plan. If he could make it down to the first floor to the arcade, I could shut the mountain lion in. He told me he didn't know how much longer he could keep running, but I insisted that he kept going. He ran down a non-operational escalator, and so did the mountain lion. The arcade was about a football field length away. I told him that once he got to the back of the arcade to sprint towards the entrance. I was already at the gate and praying the mountain lion didn't stop to get me first. I guess he was determined to catch Ryan because he ran right past me. Ryan got to the back of the arcade and quickly reversed his path. I had the gate halfway closed and Ryan slid like he was stealing home plate. He got through and I shut the gate on the beast. Of course it was angry and trying to break down the metallic gate. Ryan just laid on the floor, gasping for air and crying at the same time. He said he couldn't believe that he was able to not only outrun the mountain lion, but to be alive. Ryan asked me for my phone so that he could call his dad. About 15 minutes later, his dad and a couple of paramedics arrived. The paramedics immediately went to Jennifer after I told them where she was. She was badly wounded, but they said that she was going to be all right. I wish it were the same for Jackson. As the paramedics took Jennifer by ambulance to the hospital, we went outside to get some fresh air while we answered some questions from the press as well as Ryan's dad. Animal control eventually arrived and tranquilized the mountain lion. They said they were going to run some tests, but that would be sent back to the zoo. We all made a pact that we would never return to any abandoned place out of respect for Jackson and Jennifer. I've never felt so guilty in my life, because the whole exploration thing was my idea. Aaron and Ryan told me that I couldn't think like that. I couldn't help it, I had survivor's guilt. A few days later, we put Jackson to rest and Jennifer was discharged from the hospital a couple of weeks after that. None of us really speak anymore because we went our separate ways after high school graduation. I continued to live with my mom so she wouldn't be lonely. Instead of college, I got a job working as a mechanic for my Uncle Rob. I was able to save up enough money to get a Galaga and this Pac-Man cabinet. I mounted the Batman ring to the top of it as a tribute to Jackson, Jennifer, and Dad.
Before I tell you my story, I must give you a bit of a history lesson about the abandoned elementary school I broke into. Back during segregation, a local school decided to be the first school in town to desegregate their students. At the time it was controversial and had its fair share of pushbacks, but it would be the cornerstone of the rest of the schools following the same model. There were 4 black kids that decided to stick together at their new school because they were afraid of the unknown. This caught the attention of the janitor of the school, who was a known racist and hated the fact that his school was doing such a vile thing. However, he wasn't about to be the one who left with his tail tucked between his legs, so he begrudgingly stayed. As the school year progressed, he became more and more angry at the group of kids in particular. He had an idea that he believed would not only help his predicament, but the world's. He was going to kidnap the kids and murder them. He did just that. The kids didn't live too far from the campus, so he snatched all 4 of them in the night while they were sleeping, and took them to the boiler room of the school and butchered them. Afterward, he had some clarity and regretted that he killed 4 innocent children for being nothing more than who they were. He climbed all the way to the top of the smokestack of the school and jumped off and plummeted to his death. His body as well as the children's were found the next morning by some staff members. That was more than 60 years ago. The school would eventually shut down due to the incident and the city's expanded development. It was to be remodeled later to become a church, but that was proven to be tough and they constantly ran into issues. So they decided to just abandon that project for the building as well. Time was not good to the school. It was eventually boarded up and left to waste. That's where my story begins. Being a local and growing up hearing the legendary story of the racist janitor was told at every sleepover, campfire, and school hallway in town. I was fascinated by it and even was able to get the blueprints of the school for a project. I mounted that thing to my bedroom wall like it was a Lamborghini poster or something. I was proud of it. That being said, I decided to explore the building myself and document my first-hand experience. I was sitting on my back porch drinking coffee and smoking a cigarette as I looked at the crisp fall sky. The sun was setting behind my giant elm trees as it eventually sank into darkness for the evening. I took the last drink of my coffee and final drag of my cigarette and walked inside my house to gather my gear for my endeavor. A crowbar, my phone, gloves, a flashlight, the blueprints, and some leftover biscuits from breakfast. I was all set and ready to go. I got in my car to take a 5-minute drive to the school. I got out of my car and stared at the school for the millionth time. I proceeded towards it to begin my excursion. I saw a boarded-up window I wanted to climb through on the north side of the school. So I pried it open and turned on my flashlight before I climbed in. As I climbed in, my flashlight picked up floating dust particles and old school desks. There were pages and pages of papers all over the floor with an old chalkboard with the teacher's notes written in chalk. It must have been the history class because there were important dates like 1492, 1776, and 1954. I took pictures of everything I just described and went into the hallway. It contained rusted green lockers and chipped floors as far as my flashlight's beam could go. I was looking for the old teacher's lounge that was a few doors down the hall. I located it, but it was locked. I took my crowbar and opened it with a little elbow grease. It had a circular table with 6 chairs around it. Sitting on the counter by the sink was a coffee maker that hadn't been touched in decades. In the corner behind me was a large potted plant that contained a dead fern and a vending machine that was filled with candy. It was a sight to see. I snapped a photo and walked out. The library was on the 2nd floor and I really wanted to grab a book to add to my collection. So upstairs I went. As I opened the double doors, I could smell old books and rotted wood. I scrounged the shelves until I found the book I was looking for, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. It was beautiful and I put it right in my backpack before heading out. I didn't want to spend too much more time, well, this evening anyway, so I wanted to see the boiler room where the janitor killed the kids to see if it was as spooky as I always pictured it. I got all the way down the stairs and down another flight of stairs to the basement. There was a sign on the wall with an arrow pointing me in the right direction. I know that it probably wasn't the safest place in the building, but I had to see it. I entered the boiler room. It was a cold room that used to warm the whole building. It was bizarre to see it being dormant. Over by one of the drums was a workstation that contained a bench with 3 side drawers. I opened the top and there were just a variety of tools. The second drawer had an old phone book along with schematics for machine parts. The last drawer had a hardcover book. It was a journal and it belonged to the janitor. I took pictures of each page and decided to leave soon after. As I turned to leave, I could hear children's laughter followed by screams. I shined my light on the ground and a puddle of blood just appeared from under my feet. My boots were soaked out of nowhere. I then heard above me the boiler room doors slam shut, then heavy footsteps protruding down the stairs. There was also a grinding sound along the ground happening at the same time. I waited for the intruder to show themselves. It was the janitor wielding an axe he was dragging along the floor. I was not believing what my eyes were seeing in that moment. I was frozen in my tracks and couldn't move. As the janitor approached me, he said in a very low and demonic voice, "Don't worry about the children, they were given a better death than they deserved," followed by laughing after his statement. Slowly he was stomping his way towards me and holding the axe in both hands. The blade was dripping with blood as it made a trail on the floor. He smirked at me as he got closer. He was about 2 feet away from me as he lifted the axe over his head to strike me. Just then I grabbed my crowbar and jammed it into his abdomen. It went right through him. He was an apparition. He just looked down at the crowbar and laughed maniacally. I couldn't help but take off and run, but as I decided to do that, I slipped in the blood and fell and hit my head hard on the ground. I blacked out. When I woke up, I was still in the same spot I was when I passed out. Only there was no man, and the blood on the floor was gone. I grabbed my things and bolted up the stairs. When I opened the doors, I noticed there was sunlight. I had been unconscious all night. I ran to my car and attempted to leave. When I did that, I heard a car approach me. It was a cop car. I looked bad with a crowbar in my hand with my gear. He asked me what I was doing, and I lied and said that I was there because I needed to pull over and call my mom for directions to her address on Hayden Street to house sit for her. The cop bought it and told me it was about 6 blocks away. I thanked him as he pointed me in the right direction and drove off. I took a huge sigh of relief before I lit myself a cigarette. As I was sitting in my car, I pulled up the photo app in my phone. I was looking at the pictures I took and noticed something strange. They all had the janitor in them. He was in the corner of every single one of them. He was just standing in the corner and smirking with his axe by his side. They were terrifying to look at. I scrolled through to see the pages of his journal, but there was only one photo of it. I checked my discarded photos, and they weren't there. I went back to the one photo, and it was what seemed to be his final entry. It read as follows: "I can't take this shit anymore. These kids are mocking me by just simply existing. They huddle together and think they are safe, but they aren't. They don't know the amount of hell I can bring them. As a matter of fact, that's what I'll do. Hell will pay them a visit tonight. Hell will be there with an axe and malice. If God refuses to relieve me from them, I will do it myself. I will strike them down and reclaim my sanity. The little fuckers won't even see it coming." His face was once again in the corner of the photo. I could still hear his laughter and the axe scraping against the floor in my head. I threw my phone on the floor and gasped, started my car, and got the hell out of there as quickly as I could. I promised myself I would never return to the school. Now that I know the ghost stories about what he did were real, I couldn't face him again, even if I wanted to. He is an evil spirit, and I was a fool to go poking around in his domain. So to make a long story short, don't ever explore abandoned places. The risk far outweighs the reward. Consider yourself warned.